Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So today I'm lucky to have two guests from the Grain Growers of Canada. The Grain Growers of Canada is the national voice for Canada's grain farmers. They represent over 65,000 producers through 14 national, provincial, and regional grower groups. Grain Growers of Canada advocates for federal policy that supports the competitiveness and profitability of grain growers across Canada. And with me today, I have Andre Harpe, the former chair of the Grain Growers and also a third-generation grain farmer from Alberta, and he works alongside his wife and three daughters. And Kyle Larkin, the executive director of the Grain Growers of Canada. Kyle is an award-winning public affairs executive and has spent most of his career changing policies at both the federal and provincial levels. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome to be here.
Thank you. So glad you're here. So, let's sort of get started with some statistics on family farming. It's such a big component of Canada's landscaping. So how many, do you have the numbers off the top of your head of how many family-owned grain growing farms there are in Canada?
Yeah, I can start on that. There's approximately 65,000 family-owned grain farms across the country, but that's just grain.
Okay.
Folks who are growing, wheat,
Right.
barley, canola, peas, lentils. If you include all farms across Canada, so include, eggs, dairy, livestock, et cetera, you're getting up to a number of around 190,000 farms across the country that range in size. So you have some, especially in the prairies, especially where Andre lives, where, you're looking at farms of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 plus acres. And then places in possibly in Ontario or in Atlantic Canada, you'll have more farms on a smaller acreage. So maybe 100 acres to 400 acres to 800 acres.
Oh, right. And, there's been a lot of land development, a lot going on. Has the number actually dropped in the last 20 years with the number of family farms?
Definitely. We lose around 500 to 1,000 family farms every year. Some of that is through consolidation. Some of that is to, sales to development. But when you just think of places like Vancouver or Toronto or Calgary, major cities that are developing and needing more land on a yearly basis, they're purchasing a lot of that fertile farmland to build houses and condos and shopping malls on. And so
Right.
just naturally that we're losing farmland every year. And because of that, we're losing a lot of farm families as well.
So when you said consolidation, is that consolidation with other family farms or is that more to large businesses?
Yeah, I think
No,
Andre
that's
can probably add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think basically you're seeing a little bit of both, but for the most part, it's to more family farms. The family farm is changing. What we thought our family farm was 30, 40 years ago to what it is now and to what it may become. It is totally changing. You're starting to see family farms that, 20 to 30,000 plus acres is not unheard of anymore. And it's strictly through consolidation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add that you are seeing a small growth. I mean, you still have 97% of farms across the country being family farms. So I'll put that stat out there. But you're also seeing a small growth of corporate farms across the country. So farms that are, 100,000, 200,000 plus acres that are really owned by corporate interests. So small example I can give you, I know there's a conglomerate of doctors in Saskatchewan, for example, who made very good money as practitioners, as healthcare practitioners, who are taking that money, purchasing farmland, and then renting that farmland back to the farmer. So that's why when we talk about corporate farming, which we do a lot of, that's kind of an example of what we're talking about. And we're always out there almost on a daily basis advocating for the family farm and trying to protect family farmers across the country.
And, I see it in my clients. I have farmers that we work with, because as a family, we work from trying to maintain the family business in the family, regardless of
Hmm.
what the industry is. But I'm noticing in my own practice a shift from the next gen not being as ingrained in wanting to maintain the family farms. So are you anticipating any change or drops in the next 20 years?
And I think that's going to continue to change. It's interesting what you said, and I'm going to give what you said was basically the family business.
Mm-hmm.
And, a family farm is a family business, and I don't think we're any different than somebody business down the street. It's getting back to it's how do you keep your kids engaged? How do you get your kids to come back into what you've worked so hard, over the last, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
yes, it's going to change.
so as you mentioned, what I see, and regardless of the industry, I tell you, regardless of what industry they're in,
Hmm.
parents always want their kids to go and do something else because they remember the hardships and how they struggled to build the business or get the farm going or the issues that they deal with. And so everybody wants to shove their kids into a different industry only to put them in the same position in the new
Hmm.
industry, right? But I am noticing, again, the family is not interested. But what's kind of, and I don't know if you're seeing this, but there's a shift from being a working family member of the farming community to being a business owner. So I've got a family with all girls, and they don't necessarily want to be out in the tractors working on the farm, but they want to run the farm. They want to
Hmm.
be in marketing. They want to do social media. They want to run the business element of the family farm, as opposed to being the one learning to, you know, understand the how to run the actual farmland. They want more the business side. Are you seeing that?
Well, so it's quite interesting. My farm is actually I have three daughters.
Oh, there you
So
go.
yeah, so there you go. The really interesting thing to me, I guess what you're suggesting or what you're seeing is more the complexity of whether it's business or since we're
Mm,
talking about farms today, but it's the complexity of the business has changed. It gets back to probably when I started, that's all you had to worry about is basically how do you get the seed into the right depth? How do you,
mm,
basically it was more the physicality or the physical work of it. Now, and whether we like it or not, things have changed. It gets back to all of a sudden we do have to worry about social media. We do have to worry more about communications, and we do more have to worry more about actually running a business.
mhm.
Because it's become that much more complicated. The interesting thing I'm seeing with my daughters, they actually want to get out in the fall. They want to. It's my turn to run the grain cart because it gets back to for them. Uh, it's less stressful for them.
Yes.
It's getting out in the field and actually doing things so that they enjoy that part of it too.
Well, and I think again, this is from my own experience with clients, is that 20, 30 years ago, farming was different. And I think as the
Mhm.
parents who are currently in the farming component of the business are thinking about all the hardships that they had to deal with. And there's that
Mhm.
stress of, is it raining, too much rain, not enough moisture in the winter?
Mhm.
Like there's so many different elements that come into being a business, but it's no different than any other business. Lumber prices go up, COVID happens and you're shut down. There's so many different elements. So what do you think can be done to keep family farms in the family?
Yeah, I could.
And I think, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I could start on that, and Andre, I'll let you finish.
Yeah.
But I think you're speaking exactly to the unpredictability of owning a small business, and farming may even have more unpredictability than other things. I mean, as Andre can speak to, changing weather patterns is a big thing that farmers are experiencing in Canada, especially over the past couple years, where previously you may have relied on the weather to be near the same year over year, but now it's almost changing in a dramatic fashion, and it's really impacting farmers across the country. On top of that, you have the rising cost of inputs, so rising costs of fertilizers or pesticides or seeds. You have a lowering price that farmers are getting for their actual crops at the end of the year, so for their canola or wheat, and then you have increasing government taxation. So I think the one thing that we can predict is government regulation and government taxation, and it's one of the more concrete things that can be changed. The prices for crops is always going to change. The price for inputs is always going to change. The weather is always going to change. But what can help is the government being an equal partner to farmers. So when we think of the capital gains tax increase, for example, that's had a huge impact on family farms across the country and really challenge the next generation that wants to take over, because we know the land prices across Canada are already through the roof because of just the interest that it's had and the inflation it's had over the past few years. So it's already challenging for the younger generation to take over the family farm, because they're going to have to go in debts of the millions of dollars. And with an increased capital gains tax, well, they're going to have to incur even more millions of dollars of debt. So we've been out here in Ottawa for quite some time advocating against the capital gains tax increase, because it's one of many impacts on the family farm. Others include, the carbon tax or increased government regulation, or not being able to get the most innovative products into Canada. So there's many ways that the government can help in Canada make things a lot more predictable, be an equal partner to things. But it's a long journey that we've been on, and we're hoping that the government can help us. But it's challenging every day to keep family farms in Canada. I don't know if Andre would add anything to that.
And then maybe not too much more. I think, Kyle, you said it very, very well, but it gets back to, we have to make the family farm fun, or basically, and livable. And so and as Kyle said, through being able to transition better, but at the same time, a lot of kids don't see as agriculture as being what I would call as being an equal partner, or there are other industries that maybe are communicated better, or made to look better. So it gets back to, we have to put a better face on agriculture. And I think just even say the government's, providing backstops. But basically, it's going to be a lot of help, because there's going to be a lot of challenges that are coming up.
Well, I talk about this all the time with family businesses and finance. And I think what the school's sometimes lacking is the understanding of your financial situation, and to do more financial literacy in schools so that, we don't see a lot of debt. And what about, farming, more education on that? Because again, we need farmers. We eat, like it's not going away, just like financial, elements, they're not going away. And so I am a big proponent of more financial literacy. And, what about more information literacy on farming and the importance of having farming, and more than just out there planting seeds or milking a cow? This is a whole business. It's not just farming, it's a business. It keeps the economy going. There's so many different elements. What about that, Kyle? Has there been any sort of push to get more education in the schools?
Well, I just want to agree with you that, when you get out of high school, or even when you get out of university, they don't teach you how to manage your credit cards. They don't teach you how to invest correctly, save for your retirement. I've had so many colleagues or people that I've hired over the years where I've helped them through, hey, this is how you're going to maximize your Aeroplan points, for example, or this is how you're going to maximize your investments, right? Because you have to save for the future early on. So I do want to give a plug, though, for Ag in the Classroom. They're a not-for-profit organization that operates across Canada, and they actually will go into elementary schools, go into classrooms, and teach children about the opportunities in agriculture. And it's extremely interesting, because it's not just, Andre the farmer type of role that you can play, but there's financial roles you can play in agriculture. There's marketing roles you can play in agriculture. There's even IT roles. There's everything you could imagine. There's a massive value chain. Grain farmers are, in my opinion, the most important part of that value chain. But there's a lot of companies and organizations that work in the space that have job opportunities. So Ag in the Classroom, I'd recommend all your listeners check them out, because they do an extremely good job across the country just promoting the experience, the opportunities in agriculture.
Absolutely. And when you talk about opportunities, there's, like you said, there's so many opportunities, but think about exporting, understanding economies. And so it's not just, you leave high school and you become a farmer. There are business roles within the farm to make it a business, and to engage the other generation or the next generation to be a part of the business. And if you don't want to be out in the land, because there's people who love to be outside, but there's also roles. Like I've got two boys. One's would be amiss if he had to be inside all day. Like he's an outside, I say kid, but they're like 30, so they're not kids anymore. And then one who'd be indoors all the time. But there's still opportunities in any industry, depending on what you love to do. But so other than, the taxes, and again, that was a big hit this year. But taxes and death are kind of inevitable, right? Regardless of the industry. You might not like them, but I want to talk about what are some other challenges and what are some other opportunities for the farming communities.
The U.S. is our largest trading partner for grain and grain products. So if we got hit with a 25% tariff, it would have a major impact again on the livelihoods of grain farmers across Canada. At the same time that we're already dealing with major uncertainty in China. Since the government took tariffs on Chinese EVs and Chinese steel and aluminum, China has hit back to go after our canola and go after our barley. And both the prices for those grains, those commodities, and the prices for other grain have already gone down because of that uncertainty. If you layer it onto that uncertainty with the US, and I can tell you that there's certain grain farmers I've spoken to across Canada that have already had certain programs of theirs canceled with some American buyers because of that uncertainty with President Trump and what's going to happen there. There's already a lowering in prices that farmers are getting for their grain. So we speak a lot about the livelihoods of grain farmers because it is an unpredictable world that they live in, and some years are great and some years are extremely bad. So international trade is a major component of that, and we're working with the government to further diversify our trade around the world. But at the end of the day, the U.S. and China are always going to be some of our largest trading partners just because of their population masses. So that's where a big challenge is, but also a big opportunity. There's huge opportunities in international trade. We just signed a free trade agreement with Indonesia. So there's opportunities out there, but it's going to take some time to get there. And the last note I would make in terms of opportunities, because I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, is there is an opportunity for Canada to be an agriculture powerhouse in the world. We have the foundations. We have great land. We have great farmers. We have the great foundations to be an agriculture superpower. But again, I go back to the government piece. We need the right regulations and taxation, et cetera, to allow our farmers and to allow the entire ag industry to succeed. Because I can tell you that food demand in Canada and food demand globally is just shooting upwards. And Canada, we kind of have a responsibility to respond to that because of the abundance of land that we have and growing conditions that we have. So major opportunity, but we need to be able to really take it. I don't know if Andre would add anything to that.
Actually, just more to the opportunity side, it's getting back to how sustainable we are. And basically it changes in how we've managed our land in the last 20 to 30 years. The ability to be able to produce a crop over the summer without actually having to till the land is just absolutely amazing. But that brings forth some of the regulations and stuff. But that's just how efficient and sustainable we are is great.
Right. Just a couple of points. One is we're exporting so much grain, but we also import grain as well. So obviously if we import, there's going to be a tariff, and then of course we're probably going to reciprocate if it does go through, that we will also put one on the incoming. Will that change how you deal within Canada? Will that have much of an impact? So I'm not going to bring in, I'm going to buy within Canada?
Yeah, I think it depends what the tariff situation looks like, right? Because you could have export tariffs and you could have import tariffs. Export tariffs isn't something that Canada's done a lot historically, but that's where the government of Canada would tariff their own goods being exported to the U.S. so that American consumers would not only get hit with the American 25% tariff, but they'd also be hit by a Canadian tariff. And it's really the American consumer that would suffer, the American that's purchasing, a loaf of bread or a bottle of canola oil or whatever you want to mention.
And also I wanted to ask, what is the average age of the farmer in Canada right now? Do you have any idea?
Average is 57, but maybe Andre has an anecdotal evidence.
I was going to say 57, 58. So yeah.
That actually was a lot lower than I thought, because boomers are 60, right? The youngest boomers are 60, and part of the reason why my business and what I do is you know, such a big deal right now is because businesses are going to transition, right? And so if
Mhm.
you're 50, 57, 56, somewhere in that range, you still got a few years to go, right, before you're forced
Yeah.
to do it.
Well,
But having, aging population is going to have a big impact on the transitions, and starting to talk about it earlier, and the opportunities I think are key, right, to have families start to talk about it
so
early.
one of the interesting things is because of the changes in technology and the use of technology, farming has gotten easier. So it gets back to it's not uncommon now to have a 65 to 70-year-old farmer
Hmm.
because 30 years ago it was quite physical and it's not so physical anymore. So as the average age is coming up, we're finding it's able to come up also.
Right. Now, and you might not know this statistic, but I'm just asking this question. So, you've got the tax implications, and again, that doesn't matter what industry, they're gonna hammer you because, of course, they need taxes. That's just the way it is, as much as we dislike it. Um, but do you think that most farm families actually have estate planning done prior to a transition? Is that something that you think would be of value to your family members, family farms, to start talking about, okay, well, here's the issue we have, but we have to plan for this in advance and not wait for it sort of to be thrust upon us? Do they have planning?
Yeah, I'm just going to say not enough planning is done.
Mm.
But one of the problems is because of the complexity of tax law in Canada,
Right.
it gets very, very difficult to actually do a lot of planning because even if you look at the last capital gains that is brought in, we've had it very carefully explained to us that actually if you use the full amount of programs there, it's actually you have to, it gets to be quite high before the number actually changes. But there's also a lot of assumptions built in. And one of those assumptions is that there's going to be a married couple is actually going, or like a couple is going to retire. But at the same time, it gets back to just like we're talking, make it, a lot of a lot of the husbands, a lot of the guys tend to farm until basically they die in the field almost, or
Right.
die,
Yeah.
they die working. But that just throws all the estate planning that you may have done. That actually just throws it out the window, and you have to start over again because all of a sudden, instead of being able to work with two people, you are now down to say maybe one person,
Right.
or so that gets to be one of the issues. Estate planning is good, and you should always do it, but at the same time, it gets back to it's very complex, and it doesn't take all of it takes is a death of a spouse or something, and
Mm.
that totally changes everything that you've done.
However, that could be part of the plan, right? Is what if you
Yep,
live too long, die too soon, or what does that look like? So,
yep.
from the fact that you represent 65,000 producers, is that something that the grain growers of Canada have even really advocated for within their members, to understand family transitions, to look at options, to look at estate planning? Because you have the ear of all of these people. So there's one side, which is the tax side, but regardless, if you don't have a plan, you have a plan. That is a plan, not to have a plan. You might not like the consequences, right?
There's no
But
plan.
there's no plan as a plan. So, I mean,
Yeah,
welcome to Canada. Actually,
yeah.
just about anywhere else. But do you advocate for that? Is there other things that you do for your families, other than just look at federal policy and trying to change some of that? Is that something that, seeing what's happening in the next 20 years, is that something that you're thinking of providing more information on, maybe education on, to get your family, because it's important that families farms stay in the family and they stay here in Canada,
Mhm.
right? And so is that something that you've considered?
Our main role is very much external facing, right? We're here in Ottawa, across the country, advocating on behalf of grain farmers and ensuring that federal policies or taxation or whatever it might be is in line with grain farmers, and that government remains or becomes an equal partner to our sector. But to answer your question, I think one of the when we got the news of the capital gains tax increase through budget 2024, and we started to do the research to understand how will this actually impact grain farmers, one of the things we came across was how different almost every single grain farm is set up across the country. Some are sole proprietorships, some are corporations, some have multiple shareholders, some have just one shareholder. Every grain farm is almost different in terms of the way they've set themselves up across the country, and it's very difficult to kind of find an average. So we were able to average it out for our capital gains research, but at the end of the day, it is difficult to find what that average is and advocate for something there, because almost every farm is different. But what I will say as well is we do advocate on things that do deal with succession planning and intergenerational transfers, et cetera. I'll recall a few years back when Bill C-208 was going through the House of Commons. It's the bill that allowed intergenerational transfers between father, mother to son or daughter to be taxed at the same fair rate as a different type of sale that was just an outside type of sale. So we advocated very strongly for that bill to pass. We were happy to see it pass a few years ago, and now the term intergenerational transfer is very much enshrined in law and enshrined in taxation law, and that's something now we're leaning into when we're advocating against the capital gains tax increase that we saw a few months ago, and that still exists to this day. And we still haven't seen legislation tabled, unfortunately. We're waiting for that. I don't know if we'll ever see it before an election, but we're still advocating against it, and we're hoping we can get back to the position we were at before these changes came along.
Right. So I think we're just about out of time, but I do have a question for both of you. Generally, I ask the top three, but I'm going to ask the top two from each of you. What are the top two pieces of advice that you would give to family farm owners, grain farmers in Canada? What are the top two tips that you would give them? Things they need to do or should do? So I'll start with you, Kyle.
Yeah, I'd say number one is get involved. I mean, there's a number of provincial and regional groups, and there's obviously Grain Growers of Canada at the federal level that advocate on behalf of grain farmers, but we can't do it alone, right? We're a small team. Federally, if you put all the agriculture or grain lobbyists together per se, you're maybe less than 50. So we're a small group, but we're a small and mighty group. But where we can really elevate our voice is when we get those thousands of grain farmers across the country involved and activated. So we've got multiple campaigns, be it on keeping Canada trading, or be it protecting family farms to fight against the capital gains tax increase. There's a number of ways that grain farmers can get involved. Number two, and I think is most relevant to your show here, is getting succession planning done early and often as possible, because as you mentioned, there are those stories, and as Andre mentioned, there are those stories where the planning hasn't been done, and then the family's put into disarray, and you don't know who's getting what or who's being involved in the corporation in the future. So I think that's a tip that I'd have to give to grain farmers who may be listening.
And farmers like to keep everything close to the chest. They don't really like to talk a lot.
Yeah.
From my experience, anyway. Andre, I know you go second. Yeah, you might have taken your top two, but what are your top two?
No, not a problem. Actually, my top two, and I'm going to be a little more personal, and I guess more or closer to the farm, because I totally agree with what Kyle has said. You have to get involved. But anyway, my top two, and it gets back, they're almost together, but it gets back to get your family more involved and listen to your family. And that's the big thing. It gets back to it's one of the ways to ensure. I think we talked about succession and everything else, but get your family involved as much as you can.
And you know what? At those don't change. It's communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've never had a family come to me because they've had too much communication. So very important. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. We really appreciate it. And we know how important grain growers are all over the world, but particularly here in Canada, because that's where we're based. So anyway, I appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find Blue Roots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.